You're saying the complexity of the human mind is, at least from our perspective, nearly infinite.
Is there meta phenomena, what sometimes gets described as sort of levels of emergence, where at increasing levels of complexity, you have novelty evolve that you can't predict
Yeah.
from lower levels of complexity. Like, for example, atoms to molecules. It's just one example. I think neurons to consciousness, consciousness to culture, right? That there are meta phenomena that separate from the phenomena underneath of them, and thereby add in an entire aspect of novelty. So I think we are. I mean, I really think this is true, that we are all infinitely fascinating because these levels of emergence, of novelty that are inscrutable because you can't predict from one level to the next or understand fully, are what make us. And not just us, but I think sentient creatures, right? Human beings, right? But sentient creatures, inestimably more interesting than creatures that aren't sentient. And I don't know. I think when we think about machine learning and artificial intelligence, I think it's that we're trying to create levels of emergence that now we don't fully understand anymore, which I guess is both exciting and maybe scary too.
Yeah, so you start at the physics of atoms, quantum mechanics, go into chemistry, go into biology. From the biology, you have the functional phenomena, especially as manifested in the human brain, and then multiple brains connecting together through consciousness and intelligence creates civilizations. It's pretty interesting. Where do you think the magic is? At which layer of the cake?
Every layer. Because every time you emerge from one thing to another, I see it as an analog, like the concept of the dialectic, right? Where I think it was Hegel, right, who realized, hey, when you have like thing A and thing B, and they're complicated and they come together, you don't get a hybrid of A and B, right? You end up getting something that's new, that's novel, and I think that describes to some degree that, like, what emergence is, except there's a whole new, in a sense, universe of novelty, right? That comes at each layer of emergence that allows infinite possibilities that weren't possible before. And I think that's why we're so complicated, that our functional neuroscience, right, which I think is psychology, right? Our ability to think about ourselves, about others, to be reflective, is sitting on top of so many layers of emergence. Like the idea of standing on the shoulders of giants, that we're, each of us, our consciousness is standing on the shoulder of a giant of many, many, many levels of emergence, of novelty, so many of which we don't understand. I mean, about subatomic particles, everything that quantum physics means. When does time become important, right? As opposed to things happening outside of time and outside of space. When do we slot into one temporal perspective, and then the complexity just, I think, grows and grows and grows.
Yeah, the interesting word you use is novelty. If true, this really blows my mind. In some either shallow or deep sense, it is true. I'm trying to figure that out. I don't know if you know something about cellular automata. Is this very simple mathematical objects where you have rules that govern each individual little cell, and they interact locally, and that you understand the very simple operation of those individual cells, but at another layer of abstraction, when you just kind of zoom out with blurry vision, these meta objects starts appearing that function. You could build a Turing machine with it. You can build an arbitrary complexity of computation on top of this kind of very simple object.
Yes,
and it's an interesting question whether that was always there. The atoms somehow know about love, right? Like about consciousness,
right.
about war and violence and evil and hate and all that. That's already laid in the possibility of that, the capacity for that. It's already in the atoms. Right. It's already in the physics. It's already in the in all the different chemistry that builds up. And it's like even the origin of life, still a mystery. That's known. That's in the physics. Right. That's known to the universe, the basic background physics of the universe. If that's not the case, it's like, where does that come from? Where's that magic? And how many layers can the cake possibly have? How many are we going to keep building? If we're constantly through this process of abstraction, of adding a layer to the cake, adding novel things, like, where's the ceiling? As we expand out into the cosmos, if we successfully can do that, are we going to keep building like more miraculous, complex objects, and then the brain is just like a middle layer thing? We tend to think of ourselves as truly, truly special manifestations of what's possible in the universe, but maybe we're just like the basic, like tiny building block of something much, much, much bigger. We're in the early days of being a brick in a very large building.
Sure. Look, I think that's entirely possible. I mean, I think the only emergent thing, so to speak, that we build is culture, right? The aggregation of us. So you have individual human minds, which are entirely unique. I mean, even the fact that time is different for you and me, right? It may be by picoseconds, right? But we can engage because our perceptions of time are parallel enough, they're close enough, right? That we can share a reality, right? But we're all living in a different dimension of time, right? I mean, we know that, right? So we're unique in that way. And then the unique individuals that we are, just like the cells, right, start to create not just one thing, not just a culture, but culture on top of our individuality, right? Our uniqueness, our even dimensional uniqueness of time and experience and consciousness. So we create cultures on top of us, but what could be beyond culture, right? And what is different from us, either on underlying levels, like, like quantum physics or chemistry or biology, or entirely different and unconceived, I think it's an immense question. And I think it's one that should create humility in us, right? That look how much we don't know, and then how reckless we are with ourselves, with our resources, with human life. And I think there it's important to say, I mean, think about how entropy rules the universe around us. I mean, how over-selected are we? How many, not just hundreds or thousands of times, but how many millions of times does there have to be a selection branch point before we get into a sort of eddy pool of counter-entropy, right? Where you can begin to create, right? Which I think is why you say, okay, the atoms know about love, right? The fact that anything is being created, right, means there's this over-selection for counter-entropy where there can be a building of greater complexity, of ultimately of novelty. And we don't often think about that, of how far removed we are, maybe light years, so to speak, from any other location, temporally, physically in the universe where this could happen. And we don't think about, what does that mean?